it on? Is it green?
Oh, you're good.
Yeah, good.
You can comment while I talk.
Yeah.
Shall we begin? Yeah, thank you. So thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Hesse McGraw, Vice President for Exhibitions and Public Programs here at SFAI. This is our last Visiting Artists and Scholars lecture of the spring, and it's wonderful to have this audience. We are so pleased to welcome Marc-Olivier Wahler here tonight. He's just arrived today from Paris. I always feel both incredibly grateful and guilty when someone takes an overnight international flight and then has to talk immediately. But thank you. I'd like to thank our partners at Swissnex who are co-presenting this event with us. Thank you, Sophie, Mary Ellen, and Benjamin. And a special thanks tonight to Benjamin Ashlock up in the booth. To Katie Hood Morgan. And to Drew Sanders. They do so much work to organize this series and to make it run flawlessly, and thank you. So I'd like to begin with a survey. How many artists in the room? Good. And how many curators? It's like 2, 3. Drew? All right, Betty Sue, so don't hold this against me. I'm going to hazard with a big generalization. So this is really to the living artists in the room. It's hard to find a curator who will truly stretch to support and realize your vision. I could probably count on one hand the number of curators who have not asked me, is that artist difficult to work with? I actually mean that. Marc-Olivier is rather the kind of curator who seems to seek out difficulty, to relish complexity, and for whom a big idea is worth the chase. He's curated over 400 exhibitions and projects across the globe, and as director of the Swiss Institute in New York and at Palais de Tokyo in Paris, he fearlessly pushed the limits of the institution in service of artists. So the artists that he's worked with, Micol Assaël, Cady Noland, Gianni Matti, Roman Signar, Christoph Büchel, these are people who are known for blasting fire out of gallery walls, for disavowing anything that shows up on the secondary market, for making soap from Berlusconi's liposuctioned fat, explosions, and inducing mass mocha into mass coma. In a very real sense, his curatorial practice seeks the kinds of uncertainty and possibility that propel contemporary art and our world forward. Marc-Olivier currently serves as founding director of the Chalet Society in Paris, artistic advisor for De Apple Art Center in Amsterdam, and founding director of Transformer Sculpture Park in Portugal. He's just been named the director of the Eli and Edith Broad Art Museum at Michigan State University at MSU, and will be moving to East Lansing in July to take up this new post. So please join me in welcoming Marc-Olivier Wahler.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So hello everyone. I'm very pleased to be here tonight. Thank you, Hesse, for the invitation. Thank you, Swissnex, also for the invitation. Thank you for having me here. It's a great honor. Tonight, I'd like to talk a little bit about strategies, because I thought, like here it's an art institute, we were like addressing mainly to artists. So I thought, what are nowadays the strategies to build an artwork? So you will see it's more like some thoughts which will be brought on the table than like an actual lecture. It's more like brainstorming, and I hope raising some issues and raising some questions for you. I'd like to start, and you will see that I follow Umberto Eco. I don't know if you know Umberto Eco is a very popular writer, but a semiologist, very one of the best semiologists. He died a few months ago, and he was teaching in Italy. And one of his assistants, he had to teach semiology to first grade students. So he came to the master and said, "Master, I have to teach semiology to first grade students. What should I say to them? Because they won't understand anything." And the master, Umberto Eco, said, "Oh, it's very simple. Talk about everything but semiology, and they will understand semiology." So I try to follow a little bit this advice, and by talking about contemporary art, trying to talk about anything but contemporary art. Of course, I have to talk a little bit about contemporary art, but let's start with Rachel. Rachel, you know Rachel from the Blade Runner. It's a very interesting case. We could also have the leader, from the invaders. And it's very interesting because you all know the story, like they are the replicants, when you see them, most of them, half of the movie, you consider them as human beings. And of course, the Blade Runner, they have to run this void camp test where they have to decide if they're facing a replicant or a human being. And the moment they realize, or they think, because there is no objective criteria, the moment they realize they're facing something else as a human being, either a replicant or an alien, then everyone change his mind about what he's seeing. That's very interesting. He doesn't lose its visual aspect, visual identity. I mean, the leader is perfect, like he regenerates himself. He doesn't have any stiff finger. He doesn't have even like an Austrian accent like some other people from other planets. They are perfect, So there is absolutely nothing you can tell visually, like he is not a human being. But every one of us are doing the process of transfiguration without any problem. The ontological status is not here at stake. Everyone is doing this transformation. So I'm talking about science fiction now. I could talk about quantum physics, about electromagnetic waves, zombie, television series, any type of fields of knowledge, I would say, where we can see some grids that allow us to understand what is at stake in these fields. And once you understand this grid, trying to transfer these grids into the art world and see if it could cast a new light on what is at stake in contemporary art. Why do we do so? So allow me first a little bit of theory, and then we will see a nice image of artworks and exhibitions and stuff like that. Well, I'm coming from the philosophical field, so I have to do a little bit of theory. The question of language. This is very, very important. First, we must always ask ourselves with which language we are speaking. You know, like the first introduction was to show you that we are talking about everything else but contemporary art. Why? Because we use the language of science fiction, or if we would have talked about quantum physics, the language of quantum physics. We don't use the language of contemporary art. Why? I will try to explain a little bit. It's interesting to notice that we rarely ask this question in the art world, which language we're speaking. In this world, in order to obtain an explanation of something, we have always turned into the art historian, the art critic, who would arrive with intellectual and linguistic language to explain what is at stake. But a philosopher like John Searle, who examined the significance of the institution and its economic, artistic, and political aspect, among other, and in this sense, the art world well and truly constitutes an institution, he came to the conclusion that every institution defines itself through its language. John Searle asked an essential question. Is it possible to talk about an institution by using a vocabulary that was formulated by those working within, using a vocabulary that was developed by the institution itself? Can we speak about the museum, in our case, in a language that was formulated by those working within the museum? You know, like just telling that sounds weird. In order to speak about a science, for example, we have developed a language that wasn't coined within that field of knowledge itself. In art, it's clear that the language we use has been completely defined from the inside. To paraphrase the philosopher John Welshman, you might have already read a few of his texts if we are interested, for example, in some artists like Jim Shaw or Mike Kelly. Instead of using a pre-established vocabulary to analyze works of art, we would be better off analyzing the role of language in the creation of artworks. Hence, this idea of discussing everything except contemporary art, I will try to accomplish this by pointing to various fields outside the art world, to different ways of doing, seeing, reading, that might allow us to see what art puts into motion. So basically, it's like trying to discuss contemporary art through its margin. And of course, if the grids we are facing gives good result, then of course try to transfer it into the art world and see how it explains what is at stake. So you understood the main question here at stake is an ontological question. Because you know we assume that a work of art is the result of an artist's work. But if we adopt first a point of view that is purely realistic, you know, in a philosophical term, what we face is just an ordinary object. I mean, you know, like the painting is just pigment on canvas. We are doing, without even realizing, we are doing this work of transfiguring what we see into something else. With the pigment on canvas becomes something else, becomes an image, becomes something that belongs to an other ontological status. So the first thing we know is in order to see an artwork, we need a transfiguration. And of course, we all know that we can point to 4 conditions for that. We need an object, of course, something, you know. We need an enunciator. Most of the time it's the artist. We need a viewer, someone who sees this object. And the 4th condition is generally the condition that makes the first 3 conditions together. For example, the institution. We will see that we have now different possibilities for this 4th condition. And this 4th condition, they all gave birth to different types of theories. As we know, like institution, we think about institutional theory, the viewer, all these correlation theories from Kant to nowadays, the enunciator, the speech act, you know, like the performativity, and the object, you know, like the object-oriented ontology that is very trendy right now. So basically the question I will try to think tonight and bring to the table is what are the strategy of transfiguration? Is there any strategies that are more efficient than others? But first thing we have to consider, if you don't believe it, doesn't work. If you are like watching The Invaders, and at certain point in the movie say, no, he's not a human being, he's an invader, he's an alien. And if you don't believe it, you don't believe it. He remains a human being. You have this example everywhere. The transubstantiation at church, you know, like you have bread and wine that has to be transubstantialized. I don't know how you say it, but into, you know, flesh and blood. You have to believe in it. And so what are the ingredients, the criteria, the strategy in order to believe into the artworks? That's for me the main question as a curator. That's why I'm very interested in always trying to go through the margins with artists such as Christoph Büchel, Gianni Motti, and all these artists who are basically working outside the common boundaries of art. So I don't want to answer this vast question, but maybe like very modestly I try to bring some, I would say, some ingredients. First, you have to adopt additional logic. That's very important. All our education is based on selective logic. You know, you can do this or that. It's black or white. You have to choose. You cannot have both. That's our whole education. But in all the science, even in like mathematics, it's not or and or. It's like and. It's an additional logic. It's not that at a certain point in science, nothing is like false or true. You have different types of answers. Some answers are more useful than others. Artists for forever, they always had this additional logic in mind. But we, as viewers, we were always taught to think with it's this interpretation or that interpretation. It's this or that. And I think it's very important to embody this additional logic to be able to build some strategy of transfiguration. a logic consequence of this additional logic is this, what I call the schizophrenic quotient, which means a good artwork bears multiple interpretations, which means a good artwork can stand 1, 2, 3, 4 interpretations. This interpretation and this and this and this. And I would even say that an ordinary object might be just an object that can bear only one interpretation. 2, 3 interpretation, maybe, of course, it's totally like very in a very square way of saying it, but maybe 2 or 3 interpretation, you might face a design object. 4, 5, 6 starts to be an interesting artworks, and then 10, 11, then you start to see it maybe a masterpiece. So once you have this additional logic, once you develop this schizophrenic quotient, you have to choose your strategy. So I will give only 2 examples of strategies, the illusionism or the smartphone. Of course, there are other strategies, but for tonight, let's see what we can do with these 2 strategies. Let's start first with the illusionism. The illusionism, it's taken from an anecdote I had with I made an interview with Christopher Priest. I don't know if you know this writer. He's the one who wrote The Prestige. You might have seen it on the movies, directed by Christopher Noland, or The Inverted World, which is for me the best science fiction book. So all written by Christopher Priest. So I was talking with him. He was telling me, if we're talking together and while talking, I take a rabbit out of my hat. You would say, and what? Okay, nothing special. But if I convince you that I have a hat, in this hat it's totally impossible that there is anything behind or hidden, and then suddenly I take out a rabbit, then you would say, it's fantastic, it's impossible, how did you do that? It's very important for that the illusionist build an atmosphere that put the viewer in a proper receptive mode. So, like for example, convince him it's impossible, there is a rabbit in the hat. In art, for example, about magic, you can build an exhibition about magic. There have been a few, even many, for example, Abracadabra, Tate Gallery 99, or some other. Or you could build a program on this very idea of illusionism. And that's just a pretext to show you some exhibition I've done at Palais de Tokyo, but just to explain you the importance for me about the program. For me, it's very difficult to talk about one exhibition. Because, we all know that a composition of artworks give an exhibition. And now it seems to be totally normal, but before, it was something kind of new, the idea of a group show and the Ausstellungsmacher, as they say in German, the exhibition maker. And in the 60s, 70s, we saw the rise of the authorship of curators. And little by little, the exhibition became a medium by itself. It's something new. It's from the 80s, 90s, and now, of course, the exhibition is easily considered as a true medium. So if we want to be coherent, we have to apply the same logic we apply to the artwork. What does a composition of artwork, what give a composition of exhibitions? It gives a program. And for me, it's extremely important to always have this idea of a program. For example, here you see the big sun, black sun in the middle, 5 billion years. This was the starting point of the program. And then you would see that every year you have like 3 sessions. Every session brings something new to the idea. And basically you build a kind of galaxy. Here was the first exhibition, 5 billion years. So again, you know, like it's not a theme show. 5 billion years ago, there was a kind of cosmic jerk where the universe, which was suspected to slow down after the Big Bang, started to speed up in such a point that Einstein said there is no fixed point in the universe. There is no fixed point in the universe. There is no fixed point in art. There is no fixed point in our way of interpreting things. And that was the beginning, the starting point of the program. The program started to investigate what is visible. You know, like in the electromagnetic field, you have a very specific focus on what is visible. Beyond and beyond its boundaries, you have invisible things, but they still exist. It's just different waves and different type of electromagnetic waves. So it started to see what is at stake with the problem of visibility. What is the excess of visibility? Here you have Tatiana Trouvé. Here you have an exhibition with Christoph Büchel. So just the exhibition with Christoph Büchel, just to tell you just a small anecdote. It's an exhibition where we had to bring into the art center 32 tons of garbage. And so we built the mountain where you had a hole, a tunnel, when you have to crawl through the tunnel. And inside this garbage heap, you had, I don't know, like 20 different rooms where you had different types of community living there. A community living through the recycling of the garbage. And you can imagine the problem we had building this, the problem with the security, fire departments, and building this in 2 weeks. And that's one example of an exhibition. This is an exhibition with Jeremy Deller. This is an exhibition with Roman Signer. I think it was like 350,000 watts to build this, to produce this electric arc between 2 umbrellas. This was the last exhibition with John Armleder. This is Palais de Tokyo. This was an international competition of chainsaw sculptures. The best sculptures, chainsaw sculpture, were convened to the Palais de Tokyo. And we had a competition of chainsaw sculpture, which was very popular. And what the important is like, it was not just for the show. The sculpture who won, I mean, the 3 best sculptures were part of an exhibition at Palais de Tokyo. You know, we were very considering it the same way as we consider a sculpture by Ugo Rondinone. This is Serge Spitzer. This is also a different type of exhibition we did. This was at Château de Fontainebleau. You know, like Palais de Tokyo were active not only in its own spot, but on different type of spaces in France or for international international institutions. This is just like a taxidermized elephant on its trunk, and it's funny because elephant was the symbol of François Ier, who was the king of Fontainebleau. So here, just to show you that how it starts, like you have the exhibition like questioning the status of visibility and going always further to the limit of what is visible to the excess of what is visible. For example, you see here the heap of the garbage mountain, the elephant of its trump. You have like a beer bottle thrown through a cannon, and like you have here Loris Gréau, you have like trees covered with gunpowder, so very fragile works. Here, if you have an army of death, you don't really see it, but it's Darth Vader's mask. And it's a choir of Darth Vader trying to sing the darkest hit. So you had the whole algorithm system rewriting each time the darkest hit. So basically it was like, this was the moment where we were like hitting the boundary of what's visible. Then we had shows like Gacona or Spy Number, where you had like radio waves, electric waves, electromagnetic waves, etc. What happens if you go beyond what's visible? Okay, you stay in the electromagnetic field, but you go beyond what's visible. And of course, if you go always further, where do you go? You disappear. That was the Chasing Napoleon exhibition. So I was at one point when I could see the logic of the program, like you go what's from visible to high visibility to what's invisible to a moment when you disappear. And then I was thinking, now where do you go? So I was reading this Prestige book by Christopher Priest, and he was telling that in every magic trick, you have 3 stages. You have, for example, any magician comes on stage and he will present you something. For example, a cage with a bird inside. That's the pledge. Present you something, shows you something that appears ordinary, but of course it isn't. So he puts a piece of fabric on the cage, abracadabra, remove the fabric, everything disappeared. That's the turn. It goes beyond what's visible, disappearance. And then there is a third stage, that's why I was interested, called the Prestige, where something that disappears reappear. For example, the bird coming out of the pocket. So that's why I thought now I have to organize a show about reappearance. Of course, it shouldn't be at the same place at Palais de Tokyo, it should be somewhere else. But that's how I could see how the program could keep unfolding. I tell you this because this is very important. Why the program? Because there is this logic. I told you the same logic, we have for the artwork, we need to have also for the exhibition, but also it's to respect the viewer. If you build a program with a narrative arc, you take the viewer, for example, who comes to the second session of exhibition, and he would understand maybe in a better way or a different way what happened in the first session, and he could even imagine what's coming next. So this is a way of putting the viewer into a process which is still in the making, which is by building narrative arc, building a context where, this is important, where belief could grow and then help transfigure the object into artwork. So that's one strategy. This strategy of the narrative arc, helping the viewer, transfiguring not only the artwork, but the whole system, exhibition, etc., into something else. This is very important because it's more or less the same strategy you have in a movie. like building narrative arcs that helps you think that the person you consider throughout the movie as a human being suddenly becomes someone else without changing his visual aspect. But now comes, and this is more like loud thinking. It's nothing, like statement, or it's more for our discussion. I think it's very important, very interesting, because we are living now. Give you some more images. We are living now in a moment where the white cube has been dematerialized into something else. We'll see why I'm talking about that. I'm talking about this trend we have, that more and more everyone has a cell phone. We scroll down. We have blogs like Contemporary Art Daily and some other blogs. And what we do is we go through exhibitions by scrolling down images by images. And this is very important because it shifts the traditional way of consensus about artworks. Basically, it transforms the white cube into a white screen. And what are the consequences in terms of strategies? And of course, the way the artwork, or we transfigure what we see into artworks. And basically, I don't want to, develop this. I think we already have 45 minutes. But basically, it increases the speed of the judgmental element we usually had, and we are accustomed to, where, for example, an art critic is going to see an exhibition, is going to write, edit, publish with a picture. In this newspaper, it would be read by a curator, would be interested in the work, and then give the artist another exhibition. This is the current, this was the traditional way of legitimizing an artwork through this process of art critic, media, and exhibition. What we have now is totally different. It's the judgmental element of consensus through the process I just described is getting transformed into a collective attention. And what has been a process of legitimation, for example, you can attribute to any particular institution or critical bodies, now become a process of simple visibility, which you could attribute to the media itself, outside channels of print media, and Zeitgeist exhibition. This is very interesting. What you do when you scroll down, you see many artworks, which means many information. And there is a very interesting article I advise you to read, written by a very young art critic, Michael Sanchez. He wrote a very interesting text like 3 years ago about what happened to your eye when you scroll down through blogs like Contemporary Art Daily. You see many things, many information, and suddenly there are some images that give some reliefs to your eye. What type of works? Because it's about artworks. It's mostly about artworks that are unfocused, which brings some gray or pastel-like, very light colors. That's for the painting. For the sculpture, it's more like surrealistic. It's like bright color that gives a very clear definition of what is the sculpture and what's the background. And it's very interesting to see then that these artworks, and I could see, I can show you some example. This is Tauber Auerbach or Sterling Ruby. Suddenly these artworks became hugely popular. Not because they were legitimized by institution, but they gained the battle of visibility. Without even realizing, you spend more time on your iPhone because suddenly, without realizing, you slow down. These types of picture on your iPhone allow you to rest your iris. And you spend more time seeing this image. So it sounds a little bit weird, no? When said like that. But he made very thorough analysis. And a collector who wants to buy an artwork unconsciously is driven through artwork that, on the collective way, gain more visibility. And it's funny to see that, for example, Tauber Auerbach and Sterling Ruby made the last years like from $50,000 to $800,000. And it's funny also that the same artist like Sterling Ruby is understood also the way sculpture are working, absolutely not unfocused, but as I was telling you before, with like bright colors, very clear, detached from the background, etc. So, like bringing, for example, concerning the picture, state of relaxation that counter the anxiety fed by the speed of the scroll interface, slowing the eye down and dilating the pupils. This is a quote from Michael Sanchez. So I think I will stop here. It's more like some thought I try to bring you. It's not at all a lecture with like introduction and a heavy conclusion telling you that I'm right to think as I think. It's more like trying to bring you some example of strategies. Because I personally, I am totally, I'm totally passionate with this idea of ordinary object getting transfigured into something else. I think it's magic, because even a painting, seeing a painting, we all take it for granted. We go in a museum, we see a painting, and we see an artwork, and we see already images, landscapes, but I cannot help myself seeing this at just first as pigment on canvas or just as ordinary object. And each time, without even like realizing, we are making this process of transfiguration. And of course, what is interesting is that this process of transfiguration goes through strategies. And we have different choices when it comes to these strategies. And I think as artists, it's very important to have these types of strategy in mind in order to be aware of the direction each of us are taking. So that's it. I think 45 minutes, 50 minutes. And now I hope I raised some questions. Thank you. I just put some images of a show I did with Chalet Society, which were artists, outside, what we call outsider artists. He was in a former, you could see here, a former school, the center of Paris, we transformed this, not really transformed, we took the space as it was, and then we exhibited artworks, like this, in a very rough way, in a way. The painting behind Morton Bartlett was made by pupils, students. But the main idea behind this show was all artists who never went to school, self-taught artists, and basically was trying to think about what are the boundaries between what you consider as an artist and what might not be an artist. And the main idea of Chalet Society was this, was more being a laboratory to analyze what are the boundaries of an artwork, of an artist, of an exhibition, and ultimately, of course, what is the boundary of an institution. Because I think the main challenge for us, curator, is the institution of tomorrow. We all know the museum as we know it today is going to change. This is, for a few years now, you see everywhere, Museum of the Future, blah, 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 Museum of the Future. We all talk about this. No one knows exactly what will be the Museum of the Future, where we know that this model that already lasts for more than a century, even 2 centuries, is going, in the next decade, to fade away and give birth to a new model. Which one? We don't know yet. That's why after Palais de Tokyo, I didn't want to take over another institution right away. I created this Chalet Society, which was more a lab to examine, to analyze the limits of what it means being an artist, an exhibition, an artwork, and of course an institution. So, as you see, it's always trying to raise questions. I don't even have the answer, but trying to build tools that allow us to study these issues. So it means I never have answers, but I have some tip of the tongue, answers. Yes?
I was curious, is your strategy in exhibits to challenge an artist to make a work that is the theme that you create? I mean, you create this big idea, this framework. Are a lot of your exhibits where they're bringing new ideas, new work that's challenging that idea, that framework?
Yeah. Actually, I never thought about what I was just telling you. It was just like after doing that, after doing my last show about disappearance, then I realized the logic behind. But I was doing this without thinking about any type of specific narrative. It just came naturally, and it happened to build the story. But the artists I invite, I never tell them, oh, now we are in the process of trying to build a program that is about disappearance. They just come and do their thing, but they come at a certain point where I guess it's important for the program. But first, I never did a theme show in my life. And second, I never invited an artist telling him, oh, now we are more into this type of thoughts. But of course, we talk together. Each artist, I've known him for 10 years more. So we know each other perfectly.
Do you think the large international biennial exhibition is a concept that's running out of gas?
The what?
The large international biennial exhibition, such as documentary Biennale.
Well, actually, this is very interesting. I think it's still important, but we all notice, I think, that Biennale before was prospective. You know, we did Biennale to see what's the new talents, what's the future, etc. Now, most of the Biennale are retrospective. We are like thinking about the past, the importance of the archives, even if you put future in the title, like the last Biennale, it's still about past or at best present. And what we see, what is prospective, is not on the white cube, but on a white screen. So there is a shift. There is a shift of, I mean, there has been a shift from this big institution. They're still very important, but for not the same reason that they were like at the beginning. But I still think that they will come back once we digest this shift. We have to handle with our way of getting the information about art, which is not the same as before, as we just saw it. Then I think we will be able to go back to this important exhibition. They will, of course, be influenced by the way we digest information nowadays, and it will take a new form. But I still think we will need this big exhibition. Anyway, we will still need exhibition. That's my take. Otherwise, I won't have work anymore. But I still think an exhibition is the only media I know you have to go through physically. And an exhibition is not something you stand in front of it. An exhibition is something you physically have to step, to walk through. It's your body is involved. Even the notion of what is in between artworks, the negative space. For me, maybe if there is one task for a curator, the main task is not only choosing the artworks. Now, if you notion of curators as someone who chooses is a little bit like inadequate, because as you see, you're curators of everything. My grandmother is curating when she goes for errands, for example. Everyone is curating. I think what is very important as a curator is not so much into discussion, is how do you deal with the negative space? How do you deal with the space which is in between each work? So just to tell you, like, the exhibition as a medium, which takes into consideration negative space, which takes into consideration the choreography each viewer is building. This is important, and this will always be, and this exhibition will change through the way we digest information, but not the way we discover physically an exhibition.
What opportunities do you see in terms of street art in expanding this notion of exhibition, especially with elements that are uncontrollable or unchoreographable, combined with the experience of those pieces, either in sequence or distributed around an area?
I think it's very challenging, street art, because it necessitates a different interpretation as the one you have when you step into a museum. And this is very challenging. That's why street art brought into the museum doesn't work, to my opinion. Or it could work if you allow, well, if you decide to change the type of interpretation, it could work. Art in public space also needs a different type of interpretation. So I think street art is very challenging because it brings a new way of seeing art, meaning a new type of interpretation. Any new type of interpretation is good because it just enlarges the spectrum of possibilities of transfiguration. Yeah?
You spoke about the museum and sort of some good qualities that it has, like that choreography and then also that ability to tell a narrative. I'm curious about what your experience has been like working in different institutions with sort of this tension between a digital digesting of art versus a more traditional institution, and kind of what those conversations are like in terms of people who might be really eager to start having more Instagrammable exhibits versus people who might want to sort of stick to what's worked in traditional settings. Just curious about that tension.
I don't know. Sometimes it's the same people, so it just makes sense. It just it goes side by side, and I think that's how we should do for the moment. Of course, an exhibition on Instagram is not the same, but it is an exhibition on Instagram. I mean, it's the way it works. It raises different issues, and I think if you can do an exhibition that works both in the white cube and on the white screen, it's fantastic. I don't know. I don't know any such exhibition yet, but I'd like to see. Please.
I'm wondering about how do you educate or what strategy do you use to educate your viewers? Like the viewer go to the museum, how do you like give them the experience and educate them to give them the respect?
Well, there's different strategy. Again, maybe I can show you this exhibition here. It was Jim Shaw. He was exhibiting his own collection, which is like old pedagogical material taken from secret society, sects and churches, and done by artists, but it was impossible to consider it as an artwork because it was like propaganda material. It was impossible to see it as an ordinary object because it was done by artists, talented artists. And we had mediators. Mediators, they were like, we work with a choreographer and we work with a cloth designer, so that you might think they belong to a secret society. And what the way they were talking about, of course, trying to explain what is at stake with this material, was absolutely not about art. They had a very specific way of talking. At first you wouldn't really understand, but then it makes sense with the content. At Palais de Tokyo, we have very, very important and strong mediator system, but again, talk about anything but contemporary art, which means try to find a language that is totally different to what is at stake. Because again, if you talk with a language that has been developed and formatted by the one who are in charge of what you try to explain, it doesn't work. How can you explain what is at stake in a museum with the language defined by those working in the museum? I mean, in no fields of knowledge, nowhere you would do that. You know, it's like forbidden. But in art, we could do it, apparently. But for me, the reason why art is so difficult to understand is because we haven't developed the proper language. So that's what is in someone who tried to mediate what's in his mind for the viewer. Any other question? Yeah.
You mentioned the traditional art form, like individual pieces, has been changed by the technology, like easy access to the photo or like Instagram. And do you think the exhibition as a like an art form will be influenced by like virtual reality or other like more like immersive like technology in the future?
Oh yeah, I think we will have to experience that. We have to go through that in order to digest it and see how we could transfer it really in the physical sphere. I think. I don't know. I have no answer. There was this nice article once, like about the Breyer Museum, saying that like it's like a kind of science fiction, saying like in 20 years, Met couldn't afford being in the Breyer Museum, so they sold it to Google, and Google organized this kind of like it's an empty museum, but you come with all your own Google. And of course, based on all your history and what you like, you would have your own museum. So you go and all the best thing is under your own personal view, because you have your Google and you look at the walls and you have all the best picture you have in your own history. So basically, that's the perfect Malraux type of museum. Totally immersive, totally personal. Each one of us have his own different type of experience you could share afterwards. Okay, that's very interesting. Does it work? I don't think so. But I think we'll have to go through that first. Because I think we need the physical presence of works. But that may be old-fashioned, maybe. But I think sculpture, who was saying that sculpture is what I bump into when I step back for watching a painting, And that's a physical presence. Yes?
Great lecture. Thank you very much. Thank you. I noticed in a lot of the images you showed, there's still this viewer-object relationship, except for the one by Büchel, Micol, the interior kind of space. And it made me think about some of the kind of immersive shows that have become a lot more popular, like Sleep No More, or some of those kind of forms where you are completely immersed in an environment. And I was just curious to hear your thoughts on how you talk about the kind of transfiguration you experience when you look at a painting, you see pigment first. What about the kind of transfiguration of the entire experience itself, where everything around you is this kind of new medium?
That's very, very important. For me, of course, it's very easy to see the immersion in the Christoph Büchel or Micol Assaël or any other type of exhibition, because you enter space and basically you make abstraction of the rest. But for me, any exhibition is an immersion, should be an immersion. Personally, when I go in an exhibition space, I look at everything: the ceiling, the floor, the quality of the wall, the way light hit the painting. Even if it's a very traditional show, I'm immersed into an environment. It's maybe like a professional effect, but I cannot see. I don't have the window vision anymore. The window vision when you could like abstract your environment, where you have a painting, a frame, and you can even like on the like this type of 19th century type of hanging side by side, that you could like abstract the rest and go focus on one painting and then another painting. For me, it's impossible. I see the whole thing, and because an artwork is a transitive object. And that's maybe the best, might be the best thing 20th century artists showed us. An artwork is transitive to such a point where an insignificant object, like say a cube, there's nothing to see. So if there's nothing to see, you just slide from the cube to the floor to the wall to the ceiling back to the viewer, and the whole thing. So it's an immersion. So some works are easier to see as an immersion, but for me it's the whole package.
Sorry. You said two things that resonated a lot with me, but sounded a bit different. You talked about the schizophrenic aspect of art with like a lot of interpretation, 1, 2, 5, 10. But then you talked about the importance of strategies and narrative and leading the witness so that he explains something one way. How do you think when you curate an exhibition about pieces of art where you don't want to tell people how they should feel or where it fits? Because by thinking about curating a perfect exhibition, you do trigger my experience and you have me feel about it a specific way, which is a bit different than having me have my own interpretation of the art.
But yeah, well, I talk about strategy, but only with you, and never as a curator. It's just to make some topics for tonight. I never think about strategies. But, you know, like, there's never a theme show. For example, the first 5 billion years start. 5 billion years ago, there was a cosmic jerk where the universe, who had a tendency to slow down, suddenly started to expand. And that's the beginning of the exhibition. So what do you do with that? Nothing. You know, just put you in an atmosphere where maybe you realize that you cannot focus on a window vision. You have to embody a way of reading which is totally open to everything, which you have to get immersed, where no specific window vision will prevail, basically. Where you're free to go where you want. Last question?
Is there a sense of visualization when you do so? Would you say that during a social political time, there's issues that needs to be addressed and will form the core, the center of attention to where you would be pushing?
Yeah, that's a very important question. It's a very, not an easy one, because it refers, you know, like end of 90s, beginning of 2000, there was this kind of like Politkunst, we say it in German because it was a lot of these type of group show happened in Germany, and where the exhibition becomes a tool to raise political issues, for example. It's very important. Does it work? I'm not sure. Why? Because I think a good artwork is already political. So if you make a political show with artwork which are already political, it's kind of redundant. I think an artist like Gianni Motti, he, for example, with you just mentioned, I said, the work with the soap made with Berlusconi's liposuction fat. And it has such an impact on Italian policy. You know, like Berlusconi had to take a stance saying like, it's not true. I defy you to do a DNA test. And the artists say, okay, let's do the DNA test. And then, of course, we didn't hear nothing about Berlusconi anymore. But this was in any newspaper taken by the opposition parties. Also, for example, when he went in the 90s in Colombia, and with the opposition newspaper, he said, like, because in Colombia people are, apparently, I didn't know that, are very fond of trying to with hypnosis. And so he said, every citizen is invited to convene near the governmental palace to meditate and try to host, to trying to convince the President's Emperor to step down. And it's such an impact in Colombia that the artist has to leave on a very, like through the small door in the airport. It's very dangerous for him. So it was not, like it's not like an exhibition that about something. It's just the artist is doing something, and then people are using it if they want to use it. But I think the artist, the artwork, the institution, they have to do something. For example, especially now in Europe, with all the refugees, and there are some artists doing this, but they are not the ones who are doing it in a very good way. Are not the ones who are, getting shots of themselves on the beach. It's other people who are trying to build things for the people, who are trying to help people think differently. Because I think down the road, why art is interesting for me, it's because it's a kind of like toolbox or like kind of like hygiene of spirit that helps you to see things a little bit different. Like maybe that's the last word, quoting an artist, because I think we always have to end with an artist quote. Not mine. It's Olivier Mosset, who said once, if you could see art as art, then reality can stay reality. And I was like, what does it mean? If you really, like, for example, in the case of Olivier Mosset, if it's like red monochrome, if you could really see this red monochrome as a red monochrome and not as the representation of, I don't know, communism, blood, or whatever, if you could see this at what it is, which is impossible, by the way, almost, then reality can stay reality. It means that you had enough worked in such a way that you used art as a mental tool or toolbox that helps you to see things as they are. And reality can stay reality. You could see reality as it is and not through the filters of propaganda, advertising, politics, and stuff like this, which is almost impossible task. But it's kind of a goal in a way. So using art as a tool for a goal, which is see things as they are and not being influenced by exterior representations. Voilà. Thank you. lot of